So, I wanted to talk about conventional reality. And by conventional reality, I'm referring to the type of reality that has been constructed by our psychological functions. Some really good examples are all around. If I turn the camera here, how does this environment look to you? I see a lot of green. The leaves are a certain color. The air is a certain color because it's misty. The trees are a certain color. I can hear all sorts of noises. All of these functions are so natural in terms of what we experience, but they are constructed by our brain, each and every one of them. This is why conventional reality is the most common type of reality that we are aware of. It quite literally is every part of our daily functioning, our psychological functioning, and what we experience. However, in terms of the psychology of awakening, what we have to do is we have to learn to let go of attachment to this conventional reality. And there's a few reasons for this. First and foremost is that conventional reality is our brain's way of taking a small sliver of objective reality, reality as it exists independent of the senses, and turning that information into something that we can use for goal-directed activity, to navigate our environment, and overall to achieve whatever it is we want to in terms of survivability as a species, replication, all of those different biological functions. Now that's useful in a certain way. However, it can also come to our detriment, especially in terms of our quest for awakening, trying to figure out what reality actually is, because we're limited by this narrow scope. The other primary reason is that conventional reality, because it has been constructed, is impermanent. And by impermanent, I mean that conventional reality is always in a state of change, just like objective reality. We can see this anywhere we look, anywhere we go. Just a few months ago, all the trees that are around me, they were not green, they were all brown. All the leaves were gone. They had all fallen off for the winter. Now they're in the process of growing back. They have grown back for the most part. Winter's coming in the next few months. There's always a cycle of change that's ongoing. And our conventional reality takes that process of change and takes it a step further, because now we're applying a level of subjectivity on top of that change as well. So that brings another layer that we have to deal with when we're searching for a deeper sense of what reality is. So in terms of conventional reality, some ways that we can prove the impermanence of conventional reality is by looking at clinical cases. That's perhaps one of the easiest ways, and also one of the most dramatic ways. Stroke patients, traumatic brain injury patients, neurodegenerative disorders, depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, all of these things shift sensation, perception, and our psychological functioning in such a way that change is often detrimental for these individuals. They may wake up one day and find that they can no longer perceive color vision, achromatopsia, from a traumatic brain injury. This is a stark contrast to what we normally see in terms of greens, browns, the water being clear, all these different colors, all these different textures, the way our environment looks. And what we find is for every different psychological function, doesn't matter which one it is, that psychological functioning can be gained, it can be lost, and it can be changed. perhaps the most important to our language and the sense of self, and they happen to be very closely related to each other. The sense of self is controlled to a good extent by our language functions, how we make sense of the world in terms of symbols, our thoughts, emotions, behaviors. All of those ultimately come down to verbal processes that have a strong control over how we dictate and execute our behavior. Our sense of self comes this way as well. I'm anxious, I'm feeling anxious. I'm depressed, I'm feeling depressed. That I that has been constructed, that has been associated with this mind and body, that too is a product of conventional reality. Many times, through altered states of consciousness, meditative experiences, sometimes even natural experiences, biological experiences, epilepsies, strokes, all sorts of changes can disrupt the sense of self as well. Psychedelics, drugs, all of these things can also disrupt a sense of self. Ultimately, what we want to do is learn to see past this sense of self. Because for most people, they associate with an individualized sense of self that is simply a small rendition of what reality truly is. The self with a lowercase s, like the self in terms of what I typically think of or what you might typically think of, that is a manifestation of our true self, capital S. The ultimate reality that is independent of all conventional and all objective realities. If we can find a way to realize this truth, not just know it as a fact, like how I mentioned it right here, but if we can actually know this truth, then, if we can actually realize this truth from our first person experience, it's very, very transformative for our mental health and also for how we perceive and understand reality. We actually find that reality goes beyond what we can perceive, what we can sense, and there's kind of a point where I like to think of it as a malfunction. Our ability to break down things into symbols, into words, into descriptions, they all break down after a certain point of practice, especially within deeper states of meditation. And when those things break down, reality doesn't just stop. It continues in a way that was previously foreign to us. It continues in such a way that now we can experience things without putting labels onto them. The sense of I, the sense of other, duality, as we often like to call it, the constraints of language, the sense of self, lowercase s, all of these things dissipate, and yet reality continues to flow in its own way, independent of what we previously thought was the case. Once you let go of these labels, which by no coincidence at all is also the way many modern psychotherapies operate, learning to control language functions, changing the way we associate with our thoughts, that changes the way we behave, that changes the way we function. All of these things come together. And someone might ask, well, what's the point of language in the first place then if it just causes so much psychological suffering? And the answer to that is evolution did not care as much about mitigating psychological suffering as it did attaining goal-oriented behaviors, replication, reproduction, and using the environment for attaining all of those things I just mentioned. Once we realize this, we understand that language is not so much the way reality truly is. It is more so the way reality is broken down into parts so that we can make use of it. We see that language is a tool. It is not the truth. And once we actually attain this realization, we will see that ultimate reality is what was always there and what language has always been within. When we realize this, this is one of the key steps to the psychology of awakening.